All right, so let's dive into something a little different today.
Mhm.
I'm sure you guys know how it is.
Yeah.
You're prepping a sermon or a Bible study on 2 Corinthians 9:7.
hmm
And, while that message of cheerful giving is always relevant, sometimes you just need a fresh angle.
Right?
Yeah?
Absolutely. Yeah. That familiar verse can feel
Yeah.
a little predictable after a while.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we dug into sermons from pastors all over,
Okay.
looking for, the unexpected takes, the
Right.
sermon illustrations that really stick, and even how some folks brought in secular thinkers
Oh,
to add a whole new layer to it.
wow. What I found fascinating is that even with a verse so commonly preached on,
Yeah.
there were some seriously unique approaches. Like, for example,
Okay.
the idea that the impact of giving might not be directly proportional to the amount given.
Oh, that's interesting. You mean like a bunch of small, consistent donations
Yeah.
from the congregation could actually be more impactful long term than a few big one-time gifts?
Precisely, it's about cultivating a culture of generosity rather than relying on a few deep pockets. And several pastors tied this back to the widow's offering.
Oh, yeah.
She gave very little, but it was everything she had. It was about the heart,
Right.
not the dollar amount.
That's a great point, and it really flips the script on how we usually think about big donors versus everyday folks just contributing what they can.
Right. It challenges us to rethink what we emphasize. Are we celebrating the huge donation,
Right.
or are we celebrating the fact that everyone is participating, giving what they can joyfully?
And speaking of joy, one thing that stood out to me was
Yeah.
how many pastors really dug into that word hilaros in the Greek, the cheerful giver part.
Yes, the fact that it's related to hilarious
Oh, yeah.
just brings a whole new dimension to the idea.
Yeah, it's not just about smiling politely as you drop your tithe in the basket. This is about giving with contagious, almost exuberant joy.
One pastor even suggested that a congregation should feel like they're about to burst into applause when the offering plate comes around.
Wow, that's a powerful image. It makes you think about how you present giving. Is it a somber duty? Or you're genuinely getting people fired up about being part of something bigger than themselves?
And that's where the sermon illustrations got really creative.
Okay.
We found pastors comparing giving to everything from Black Friday shopping
Oh, I
frenzies.
love that. The idea that people will happily spend big if they see value in what they're getting.
Exactly. So how do we present God's work as the ultimate deal worth investing in?
Right.
Then there was another pastor who used the analogy of regifting. When you give someone something you don't even want anymore.
Ouch.
Uh,
That's a gut punch, but a really effective way to make people examine their motives.
yeah.
Are we giving our leftovers to God or our first fruits?
It's about making sure our giving is genuine and heartfelt, not just going through the motions. And it's fascinating how some pastors even incorporated like secular sources to illuminate the message of 2 Corinthians 9:7.
Yeah, that was really cool. Like one pastor quoted C.S. Lewis saying, "I do not believe one can settle how much we ought to give. The only safe rule is to give more than we can spare." Kind of blows your mind a little, right?
It definitely challenges the whole idea of calculated giving.
Right.
Suddenly, it's not about percentages or formulas. It's about stepping outside your comfort zone and trusting that God will provide.
It makes you wonder, are we holding back out of fear? Or are we truly letting go and letting God work through our generosity?
Exactly. And another pastor referenced Andy Crouch's work on money and power.
Okay.
He pointed out that cheerful giving requires a heart transformation because it goes against our natural instinct to cling to resources.
I think that's something a lot of pastors can relate to. We're talking about a fundamental shift in perspective,
Yeah.
not just a change in behavior.
Right. It's about moving from a scarcity mindset to a mindset of abundance, recognizing that God is the ultimate source of all we have.
And that leads to a really interesting contrast that one pastor brought up, the difference between the prosperity gospel and a more biblical understanding of generosity.
That's a crucial distinction. The prosperity gospel focuses on giving as a means to get rich, whereas a truly biblical perspective sees giving as a way to participate in God's work and reflect his character.
It's not about personal gain, but about being a channel of blessing to others.
Exactly. And that challenges us to think about what our giving reveals about our understanding of God.
You mean if we believe in a God of abundance, shouldn't our giving reflect that?
Precisely. Are we reflecting a God who is generous or a God who is stingy, a God who loves a cheerful giver or a God who demands a reluctant tithe?
Those are some tough questions,
Right.
but it's so important for pastors to wrestle with them because ultimately our actions speak louder than our words.
Absolutely. We can preach about cheerful giving all day long, but if our own giving habits don't reflect, then our message will ring hollow.
So how do we actually cultivate this spirit of cheerful giving in ourselves and our communities?
Hmm.
It's easy to talk about it theoretically, but how do we make it a reality?
That's where the rubber meets the road, right? I think a good starting point is shifting our focus from obligation to gratitude.
You mean instead of viewing giving as a chore, we see it as an opportunity to express our thankfulness for all that God has done for us.
Exactly. Gratitude is a powerful motivator when we approach giving with a grateful heart. It becomes a joy rather than a duty.
And maybe it means finding more creative ways to give beyond just dropping money in the offering plate.
Absolutely. Serving in our communities, volunteering our time and talents, even just being more generous with our words of encouragement and acts of kindness.
It's about expanding our definition of generosity
Uh,
beyond the purely financial.
right. And those non-monetary acts of giving can be incredibly meaningful, both for the giver and the receiver.
One pastor talked about the importance of teaching our children about giving from a young age, instilling that spirit of generosity in the next generation.
That's so crucial. And it doesn't have to be complicated. Even having kids set aside a small portion of their allowance for giving can make a huge difference.
It helps them understand that money isn't just about getting stuff for yourself. It's about making a difference in the world. And that brings us to the role of the church in cultivating a culture of generosity.
Absolutely. The church should be a model of cheerful giving, both within its own community and in its outreach to the wider world.
One pastor we read about emphasized the importance of transparency with church finances, not just where the money is going, but sharing stories of how those funds are making a real impact.
That kind of transparency breeds trust and inspires people to give generously when they see that their contributions are being used wisely and effectively. They're more likely to give again.
And I think it's crucial for churches to create a welcoming and non-judgmental atmosphere around giving.
Absolutely, no one should feel pressured or shamed into giving. It should be an act of free will, motivated by love and gratitude.
One pastor even talked about moving away from the traditional passing of the plate method and providing more discreet giving options like online platforms or offering boxes.
It's about creating a space where people can give freely and joyfully without feeling like they're being watched or judged.
Because ultimately, cheerful giving is about a heart connection with God, not about meeting external expectations or quotas.
It's about allowing the Holy Spirit to move within us, prompting us to give generously and joyfully as an expression of our love for God and gratitude for his blessings.
Now, let's be real for a minute. It's not always easy to give freely, especially when we're facing our own financial struggles or when we see so much need in the world. There are challenges and obstacles that can hinder cheerful giving.
You're absolutely right. We all face those challenges at some point. And I
Mm.
think the first step is simply acknowledging that these struggles are real. There's no shame in admitting that giving can be hard.
It's not about pretending everything is fine when it's not.
Exactly. But even in those moments of struggle, we need to remember that God is a God of abundance and he will provide for our needs.
One pastor we read about talked about the danger of the scarcity mindset,
Yeah.
that belief that there's not enough to go around.
It's a lie that can paralyze us and keep us from experiencing the joy of giving. When we operate from a scarcity mindset, we're constantly holding back, afraid to let go.
But when we trust in God's provision, we're freed from that fear and empowered to give generously.
Another pastor highlighted the danger of comparison, especially when it comes to giving. We should never compare our giving to others or feel pressured to give more than we can afford.
It's not about keeping up with the Joneses or impressing people with our generosity.
Right. Cheerful giving is about following the leading of the Holy Spirit and giving what we've been given, whether it's a little or a lot.
And remember, in God's eyes, a small gift given with a cheerful heart is worth more than a large donation given out of obligation. We also need to talk about fear, because that can be a huge obstacle to giving.
Absolutely. We might be afraid of not having enough for ourselves or afraid of giving to the wrong cause or organization.
But I think the antidote to fear is trusting in God's provision and trusting in his guidance as we discern where to direct our giving.
One pastor suggested seeking counsel from trusted mentors or financial advisors if we're unsure about how to manage our finances or where to give.
And these sermons really emphasize the importance of prayer when it comes to giving. Praying for discernment, praying for God's leading, praying for a heart that's aligned with his will.
Prayer is essential. When we surrender our finances to God and seek his guidance, we can be confident that he'll lead us to the right places and opportunities to give.
Ultimately, giving is not just about money. It's about our hearts, our relationship with God, and our willingness to be conduits of his generosity in the world.
It's about reflecting his character, embodying his love, and participating in his redemptive work. But there's one more crucial aspect we need to address, and I think it's a good place to transition to our final part of this deep dive.
But I'm intrigued. What is it?
It's the connection between giving and receiving. While 2 Corinthians 9:7 focuses on cheerful giving, there's a reciprocal element to generosity that often gets overlooked.
All right, picking up where we left off,
Yeah.
you mentioned this connection between giving and receiving.
Yeah.
That's a side of 2 Corinthians 9:7. I haven't really thought about too much.
It's subtle, but it's there. We emphasize giving freely and joyfully, no strings attached.
Right.
But we also can't deny that when we're generous,
Yeah.
things often come back around to us in a way.
Okay, yeah. That's where things get tricky, though, right? If we start giving because we expect to get something in return, it kind of defeats the whole purpose.
Exactly. It becomes transactional, like a spiritual investment scheme.
Right.
But I don't think that means we ignore the receiving side altogether.
Okay.
The key is understanding the nature of what we receive.
Okay, I'm listening. What do you mean by that?
It's often not about material blessings or getting something tangible back. Think about the feeling you get when you've helped someone, the joy of being part of something bigger than yourself.
You're talking about that sense of purpose, that inner peace.
Yeah,
Those are rewards in themselves, even if they don't show up in your bank account.
precisely.
Yeah.
And one pastor used this analogy of throwing a pebble into a pond. Your initial act of giving might seem small,
Right.
but the ripples it creates can spread far and wide, touching lives in ways you never imagined.
I love that image. It really captures how generosity has a multiplying effect, even if we don't see the full impact right away.
Right. It's about aligning ourselves with God's economy, which is based on abundance and generosity, not scarcity and self-preservation.
And when we're operating from that mindset, it opens us up to receive all that God has for us, both in this life and the next.
Of course, we also have to acknowledge that sometimes we give and we don't see any immediate return.
Yeah.
It can be discouraging,
Right.
but it's important to remember that God's timing is not always our timing.
It's about trusting that he sees the bigger picture even when we don't.
Exactly. Our job is to be faithful with what we've been given, to give cheerfully without expecting anything in return, knowing that he will honor our obedience in his perfect time.
One pastor shared a really powerful story about a woman in his congregation who was struggling financially, but always gave faithfully.
Yeah.
And when asked why, she said giving was her way of thanking God for all he had done for her, even in the midst of her struggles.
What a powerful testament to the idea that generosity isn't determined by our circumstances,
Right.
but by the posture of our hearts.
It reminds me of that old saying, you can't outgive God. Even when we feel like we have little to offer, the act of giving itself can be a source of blessing.
And I think that's a message that can truly resonate with people.
Yeah.
It's not about guilt-tripping people into giving more.
Right.
It's about connecting them to the joy of being part of something bigger than themselves.
It's about recognizing that every act of generosity, no matter how small, can make a difference.
And that's a powerful message for pastors and Bible study leaders to share.
Yeah.
It's not just about fundraising, it's about transforming lives.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into 2 Corinthians 9:7, it feels like we've gone way beyond the surface level, right?
Absolutely. We've explored the heart of cheerful giving, the unexpected connections, the practical applications, even those thought-provoking questions that push us to examine our own beliefs and actions.
And hopefully pastors and Bible study leaders can take these insights and craft messages that truly resonate with their congregations.
Messages that move beyond platitudes and inspire people to embrace a lifestyle of generosity.
Because ultimately, it's not just about the money. It's about reflecting God's love and abundance in everything we do.
Beautifully said.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll be back next time with another fascinating topic.